What if one of the greatest victories of World War II wasn't won by tanks or bombs, but by actors, artists, and inflatable rubber tanks? In 1944, as Allied forces pushed across Europe after the D-Day landings, a secret American unit received one of the strangest missions in military history. They were not expected to destroy enemy divisions. They were not expected to capture cities. Their job was to convince Adolf Hitler that an army of more than 30,000 soldiers existed, when in reality there were only about 1,100 men. This extraordinary unit became known as the Ghost Army. To understand why it mattered, we must return to the summer of 1944. The Allies had landed in Normandy and were advancing across France, but German reconnaissance aircraft constantly searched for signs of troop movements. Every convoy, every bridge and every radio transmission could reveal the location of an upcoming attack. Military planners realized that sometimes the best way to hide the truth was to create a more believable lie. Instead of concealing real troops, they decided to build an entirely fake army. The official name of the unit was the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. Unlike ordinary combat divisions, many of its members had been painters, architects, advertising designers, illustrators, sculptors and theater artists before the war. Their creativity became a weapon. They designed inflatable Sherman tanks that looked convincing from the air. Within minutes, a handful of soldiers could inflate dozens of vehicles, creating the illusion of an armored division preparing for battle. They also built fake artillery, wooden vehicles and convincing military camps. Tire tracks were carefully placed in the mud. Tents appeared overnight. Laundry hung from ropes. Smoke rose from field kitchens. Everything suggested that thousands of soldiers had arrived. But visual deception alone was not enough. The Ghost Army also used sound. Engineers recorded real American tanks, trucks, bulldozers and marching troops. Those recordings were played through massive loudspeakers mounted on armored vehicles. The sound could travel for miles, convincing German observers that an enormous force was approaching. To complete the illusion, specially trained radio operators copied the communication style of real American divisions. German intelligence intercepted the signals and confidently reported troop movements that had never happened. Every fake transmission, every inflatable tank and every staged camp served one purpose: to force German commanders to move their troops in the wrong direction. Sometimes wars are won by firepower. Sometimes they are won by imagination. The Ghost Army proved that an illusion, carefully crafted and perfectly executed, could save thousands of lives. And this was only the beginning of one of the greatest deception operations in military history. The Ghost Army's deception became even more convincing through invisible tactics. Specially trained radio operators studied the communication habits of real American divisions. Every unit had its own rhythm, vocabulary, and style. The operators copied them perfectly, sending believable messages across the airwaves. German intelligence intercepted these signals and unknowingly tracked armies that did not exist. On the ground, the illusion continued. Soldiers drove a few vehicles repeatedly across muddy roads to create heavy tire tracks. They scattered ration boxes, fuel drums and equipment. Laundry hung from ropes between trees. Campfires burned through the night, while smoke drifted into the morning sky. Every detail suggested thousands of men had settled into the area. The deception had to survive enemy observation from every angle. Whenever German reconnaissance aircraft appeared overhead, the inflatable tanks were positioned carefully to cast realistic shadows. Fake artillery batteries were arranged exactly as experienced commanders would deploy them. From high above, the scene looked authentic. One of the Ghost Army's greatest advantages was speed. Within only a few hours, empty fields could transform into what appeared to be a massive military camp. Just as quickly, everything could disappear, leaving almost no trace behind. As Allied commanders prepared real offensives elsewhere, German divisions were forced to react to these imaginary threats. Troops, artillery, and armored units were redirected to defend against attacks that would never come. The Ghost Army rarely fired its weapons. Their greatest victories came from confusion. Each successful deception bought precious time for real Allied soldiers advancing toward heavily defended objectives. Every German battalion sent in the wrong direction reduced resistance somewhere else. The men understood that if their disguise failed, they would face experienced combat troops with little protection. They carried rifles, but they were never designed to fight large battles. Their mission depended entirely on convincing the enemy before a single shot was fired. As the war moved deeper into France, the Ghost Army prepared for even more dangerous assignments. Their next operations would test whether illusion alone could influence the outcome of history.
After months of training, the Ghost Army was finally ready to prove whether deception alone could influence the outcome of a real battlefield. Their first major assignments came as Allied forces continued pushing east across France after the Normandy invasion. German commanders were desperately trying to determine where the next Allied attacks would take place. Every reconnaissance flight, intercepted radio message, and reported troop movement became a valuable piece of intelligence. That uncertainty was exactly what the Ghost Army intended to exploit. Whenever a genuine American division prepared to leave an area, the Ghost Army quietly moved in. Within hours, empty fields began transforming into what appeared to be bustling military bases. Inflatable Sherman tanks were positioned in neat formations. Fake artillery pieces pointed toward the horizon. Supply trucks appeared to arrive one after another. From the air, everything looked authentic. But creating convincing equipment was only the beginning. The soldiers understood that experienced German reconnaissance pilots weren't simply looking for tanks. They were looking for signs of life. So the Ghost Army created them. Fresh tire tracks covered muddy roads. Footprints surrounded tents. Laundry hung between trees. Smoke drifted from carefully controlled campfires. Vehicles deliberately drove short routes again and again, leaving behind evidence that suggested thousands of soldiers had recently arrived. Every small detail contributed to one enormous lie. While enemy aircraft photographed these fake positions, another team was already working behind the scenes. Radio operators transmitted hundreds of carefully prepared messages. Nothing was random. Every call sign. Every coded instruction. Every routine supply request. Everything matched the communication style of real American combat divisions. German signal intelligence intercepted the broadcasts exactly as expected. To them, the radio traffic confirmed what reconnaissance aircraft were already reporting. A major concentration of Allied troops appeared to be gathering. Then came one of the Ghost Army's most remarkable tools. Sound. Massive loudspeakers mounted on armored vehicles played carefully recorded battlefield noises. The recordings included tanks moving across dirt roads, bulldozers clearing obstacles, trucks changing gears, engineers constructing bridges, and hundreds of soldiers preparing for combat. The sounds could travel for miles under the right weather conditions. German observation posts often reported hearing what sounded like an entire armored division approaching. In reality, only a handful of men stood behind those speakers. Again and again, German commanders were forced to make decisions based on false information. They repositioned artillery. They redirected infantry units. They reinforced defensive positions that were never going to be attacked. Every division moved to defend an imaginary army meant one less division available somewhere else. That was exactly the result Allied planners wanted. The Ghost Army never needed to destroy enemy formations. It only needed to convince them to move. Perhaps the greatest achievement of the unit was not any single mission. It was the cumulative effect of dozens of successful deceptions carried out throughout the final year of the war. Historians estimate that the Ghost Army participated in more than 20 deception operations across Europe. Each mission was different. Each required new ideas. New disguises. New radio traffic. New battlefield illusions. And every operation carried enormous risks. Unlike regular infantry divisions, the Ghost Army was lightly armed. If German forces had discovered the deception before the real Allied units arrived, the consequences could have been disastrous. Inflatable tanks could not stop bullets. Wooden vehicles offered no protection. Loudspeakers could not defend against artillery fire. The men understood that their greatest weapon was also their greatest vulnerability. As long as the enemy believed the illusion, they were safe. The moment that illusion disappeared, everything could collapse. Yet despite the danger, they continued accepting mission after mission. Not because they expected fame. Not because anyone would celebrate their achievements. But because they knew every successful deception saved the lives of real soldiers fighting elsewhere across Europe. Without firing many shots. Without leading famous charges. Without becoming household names. The Ghost Army quietly helped shape the final chapters of World War II.